Mark on 0. 3, 2.
No eyes on moving.
Contact front line. Neutralized! Move.
It's time to get down to brass facts. Today it's ACOG time. I think it mostly goes without saying, ACOGs have stood the test of time. While a lot of tech has come out that is both mo better, mo cheaper, in some cases even mo lighter, there is a special place in our hearts, probably right next to the part that makes us buy quad rails and $500 100 lumen clone correct flashlights in 2022. But for many, the ACOG still represents not only their choice, but potentially one of their better choices. Real quick, before we get started, rapid fire style, because I think a lot of people are a little confused by this. I was too. The ubiquitous ACOG, the 4X model, is called the Ta33, though there are some naming derivatives. It has a standard weight, a standard profile, the best FOV, the best apparent FOV, how much it takes up in your visual horizon. All of this comes at the cost of eyeball welds worth of eye relief, with a measly 1.5 inches of distance between your optic and a nice bruise on your forehead. Next down the line is the Ta11, or as I like to call it, a fucking lightsaber.
What is that thing? That thing's like the size of a lightsaber. Let me pull out my optic. Hold on for a second.
God, things were simpler back then. Good times. The Ta11 is the answer to, what if we take the ubiquitous Ta31, trade its terrible eye relief for some eye relief, but we give up a little bit of magnification and bulk. Hoplophile has a video on that one, and he very much incorrectly calls it the only good ACOG. And then finally the Ta33, the what if we said F it, I don't care about field of view, give me my eye relief, and while we're at it, make it the smallest and lightest ACOG on the market. That brings us to the thesis of this video. Were those trade-offs worth it? Or more importantly, how were they executed? I'm gonna skip the specs, the description, the foreplay, you name it. We're going straight into this video because there are 1,000, hundreds of videos both on my channel, well, just like 2 on my channel, of ACOG reviews. Everyone understands the ACOG, or if you don't, you can quickly find out how they work. I'm just going to talk about how the Ta33 really compares and if it's a functional, competent optic in this day and age. But the feature set is very appealing for what I find is the ACOG niche. When we look at ACOGs, we want a lightweight optic with some magnification that is both durable and has no frills. The Ta33 seemingly takes this to extreme, and in some regards even surpasses the Ta31, eliminating one of its major Achilles heels, the eye relief. It's also the lightest at 12 ounces with the mount, and still retains the ability of running an RMR pattern at the 12 o'clock, something that I kind of wish was there for the that new primary arms optic that came out. For the lack of a better description, this looks like my perfect field rifle optic. So how did it do in practice? Well, let's start with the eye relief. On paper, it's listed at 1.9 inches, which, thank you Jesus, is not actually what it is. Now, you can put your head at 1.9 inches, as this scope seemingly has unlimited forward eye relief, as in you can bring your eyeball literally to the point where it's touching and still have a good scope image. However, when you are at this 1.9 inches, you will have like maybe a third of the volume just be that black space inside the scope. So I would actually say the optimal head position, or the eye relief, would be about 2.5 inches. That is where the image is clearest and matches the scope body of the scope. From here, you can back your head out to about 3.7 inches, so basically more than an inch farther out, giving us our rough eye box forward and back. When you begin to pull your head beyond this, you still have a functional image, but the image begins to collapse and you get that effect where it shrinks smaller than the scope body. You know, the usual thing that all scopes do. Alright, the second aspect. The big elephant in the room is the field of view. How much did we give up? Actually, I guess that would be a small elephant because, you know what, whatever. The point is the FOV is small. Really small. Debilitatingly small. It's 20 feet at 100 yards. So for the record, the Ta33 is 37 at that same distance, so we're basically losing half of our field of view while also losing 1x of magnification. The apparent FOV is also really small because the ocular lens is tiny, the little thing you look through. And your eye is also significantly further away from the optic, so thus the image you see is really, really small and only takes up a small percentage of your visual horizon. This is good, but this is also bad. For you Game Boy kids, you know how the Game Boy was supposed to be played at like arm's length, but none of us listened to that, we smacked that shit right up to our face and now we all have corrective vision? Yeah, same deal here. While the same amount of information is displayed, if it's closer to your eye or farther away from your eye, the information is much harder to process the smaller it is relatively in your visual field of view. Thus, I often use the term relative FOV. The end result is, with a small field of view and a small relative field of view, you get an insanely claustrophobic experience when just shooting the scope. And everyone that I've shown the scope to, their initial reaction is always, yeah, I fucking hate it. Now you can learn to like it, and I'll get to that in a second. But the theory a lot of times with these relatively small relative field of view optics is that you can see around the optic because it's so much farther out and it takes up less of your visual horizon. Thus you get a blended view of the optic and the stuff around it, and yeah, this works, sort of. Note, I'm not talking about occluded or back style shooting here, nor really both eyes open shooting. There gets a point where your shooting eye, the one behind the optic, is actually able to see around the optic when it gets to a certain size threshold. However, for me, this is somewhat difficult with the Ta33 in run and gun style setups because despite the theory, to me the bell of the optic is fairly large. Add on top of that, you'll probably have a red dot on top and your ability is further diminished to do that. Now once again, this is very shooter dependent, so your mileage may vary here. Just note, compared to other optics on the market, I actually found the Ta33 didn't really excel in this aspect. Long range shooting is interesting. Much like the 3x prism I just reviewed, you have enough magnification to get, let's say, out to 400 easy, shooter and ammo rifle dependent, and then 500 to 600 becomes more difficult and very much target size, conditions, and target coloration dependent, right? If it's slightly obscured, it'll be a lot more difficult due to the lack of magnification. And you're also going to have difficulty seeing your splashes, your misses. But it's fine and does what we expect it to do for the level of magnification. The biggest difficulty at range will once again be that relative field of view. Much like with the Game Boy example, coming up close, we see a lot more information from the information given to us. However, if you push that thing away from your eyeball and it becomes a relatively small image, well, it's much more difficult to process that information, right? Because it takes up such a small percentage of your field of view, and that 3x is going to feel a lot more like 2.5 or even 2x. The inverse is also true. A friend brought out a 2x prism scope, and that has a very large apparent field of view. It's very close to your eye and has a larger ocular, and that felt a lot more like a 3x. I actually thought it was a 3.5x, and then I'm like, wait, no, this is a 2x. So yeah, I keep harping on that, but that is probably one of the most important things to understand when buying this scope. It is not only a small FOV, but it's a small apparent FOV. Okay, let's move on from that. A couple things rapid fire to understand. I bought the circle dot. Don't buy the circle dot. The center dot is gargantuan. It's just too big, like not even close. Also, the brightness level, like here with all ACOGs, just insanely bright. Put a piece of tape on top and you'll still have more than adequate brightness. The size is very, very nice, and it is noticeably smaller versus basically other ACOGs. However, versus a Ta33, which is the 4X brethren, visually it looks a lot smaller, but functionally speaking, it's not actually that different and it's actually longer. The only aspect where I think the size will really come into play is if you have a case where you want the optic to sit within the frame of the gun, because the Ta33 is basically the width of your upper, slightly larger, especially if you swap out the mount, right, because the default mount has these giant knobs, while a Ta33 is actually larger than the rifle's upper. One big thing to sort of shoehorn in here randomly, I just did review the 3X microprism from Primary Arms, and to be frank, it compares quite favorably versus the Ta33, so you need to understand that option exists on the market. It is lighter, has a better FOV, is smaller, and has an adjustable diopter, and is 5 times cheaper. Yes, it does have worse glass quality, but when you're at the 3X magnification range, it's really tough to notice unless you're in like poor lighting conditions or very super bright lighting conditions. It does have worse glass, but at the 3X magnification range, it's honestly tough to notice. So if you're really not interested in a piggyback red dot, which the Primary Arms can't do, I'd say just end the video right here and wait for those to come back in stock. I think it's honestly just a better optic in that regard. Granted, it too has some downsides. Be sure to check out my video up here before you commit on that. So how does this all come together as a package? Does it beat out the TA31, the TA11? How is the shooting experience? What did I kind of get out of it? I'll say I actually had a far more positive shooting experience once I got some time behind it. Day 1, didn't like it. Day 2, okay. And then day 3, I'm like, all right, I'm jiving with it. The big aspect of it is to treat it a little differently than most ACOGs, but right out of the gate, you need to have a red dot on top, in my opinion. I think the straw POV that you have looking through this optic makes it extremely difficult to use in isolation, and if you don't perfectly index on target, that is when you bring the rifle up, you're not exactly on it, you're going to struggle a little bit as you kind of try to find it. This was a non-issue in my initial range sessions on a known target environment where the targets really stick out, but as soon as you move the targets behind farther away, kind of blending in with the environment, or behind tree branches, obscured, or if the light was fading, it was a lot more difficult. So the red dot to me is mandatory. It gives us the benefits of a red dot, but it also kind of is worth more than the sum of its parts here because it shores up a lot of the weaknesses of the TA33's issues. For example, so very often to me the user experience was you start on the red dot site, index on the target, and you'll engage, or you might not engage, but you come up on target, decide the sighting solution isn't adequate, and then you shift your head down, you are now on the ACOG, and it happens to already be on target, ready to press the shot. In this context, this illegitimate marriage of this Holosun and ACOG was perfect. And I really never found myself giving a shit about the narrow field of view when engaging targets. And the bigger eye box meant I can do a lot of things that I otherwise would have more issues with, like roll over prone, getting behind weird objects, not perfectly stalking the rifle. It all worked quite well. That alone will sell a lot of people on this optic combination. Billy Mays here, but wait, there's more. The ability to run this optic farther forward also affords us some quality of life convenience. We can run a rear iron sight, no problem. Actually, you can even flip the rear iron sight up and look through the scope. It doesn't work, but it's just funny. It also gets the RMR further away from your face. The latter is specifically quite nice for those that prefer this, and it's an alternate way to achieve that forward-mounted RMR or red dot sight that we've been seeing kind of popularized with the battery ACOGs. In theory, this also translates to superior night vision performance, as there's far less fear of just smacking the whole bullshit assembly right into your $3,000 PVS-14, as the whole thing is just farther forward. You can also, in theory, get a night vision device behind the ACOG far easier as it's forward on the rifle. However, I tried this for all of 4 seconds and just promptly gave up. Not only is the image going to be slightly blurry because ACOG, but the tritium on brand new ACOGs is insane and it was way too bright to see under night vision in dark environments. So I don't know, maybe let your ACOG marinate for 10 to 15 years. But who cares, you already have the dot on top, so that should handle your passive aiming. Unless it's a Holosun, which, contrary to what people say, the Holosun RMR clones don't actually get dim enough for dark nights, but we're kind of off in the weeds now. So, TA33. So far so good, right? Well, here comes the big issue. The TA33 is excellent at shooting, the actual act of shooting and engaging the target. However, the lead up to that, that's where the TA33 in my eyes falls short. The Ta33 is a terrible scanning and observation scope. Let's hit up observation. Okay, sure, not every scope needs to be an observation scope. However, the second part is what kills it. The utter inability to be good at scanning, which is a big part of what I think actually makes scopes scopes. So if you're looking for a target that you don't quite know where it is, so say let's say a camo target at 200 to 300 yards, a target kind of dispersed throughout trees, buildings, whatever, that is a capability that is missing here. The combination of that actual and apparent FOV just makes you get lost in the sauce and it becomes very difficult to lose track of where relatively you're looking at. This is the fundamental crux of if this optic will be good for you or not, and it really depends actually on your environment. Let me reiterate because it's an important point. As a shooting implement, this is actually a very good optic, and I was really beginning to jive with it, and it kind of did a lot of things better than the Ta31, especially with that 1x mounted RDS. Anytime I needed magnification, I just shifted my eye and boom, I had a sighting solution with a really good magnified lined up shot. There are a lot of times where you can see a target at 1x, but you decide after your first shot or even before your first shot that, hey, I need magnification to increase my hit probability or take a low percentage shot. And it earns its place on the rifle in that regard. However, as soon as you begin to use the magnification beyond immediate shooting, the scope falls flat. Say, you're looking for a reduced profile steel target amongst a lot of similarly colored objects at 200 yards, sort of a inadvertently camoed thing. You roughly know where it is, but you must scan the area, maybe a surface area of 50 meters or 50 yards, because your 1x eyeballs can't see camoed stuff at 300 yards. Or realistic version, you took fire from somewhere, maybe your team returned fire, you've relocated, you know where it is, you bring your scope up, you just need to find him within that surface area. And you're going to have trouble finding him. Sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll find it. But then sometimes you won't, and you're going to get lost in the sauce of the Ta33 because it just doesn't work out well to find optics in this type of shooting scenario. And we did a lot of this, and it is noticeable. So the Ta33 is not a bad optic. In some categories, it's excellent. Just overall, to me, it's not a well-rounded optic, and for the type of shooting I expect to do and kind of train for, it doesn't quite tick all the boxes. Regardless, that is that. Thanks for watching. Big shout out to my sponsor, No One. Thanks, viewers. We've been growing like crazy, so I appreciate ya. Hopefully my sacrifice blood offering today of this $1,000 multi-year-old optic that no one actually cares about was appeasing to you and you enjoyed the video. If you're asking the question, hey Brass Facts, what ACOG do you like? Well, number one, I didn't really want to sour this video with that. I kind of just wanted to review the optic because which one I prefer is most certainly opinion. I also am going to do a separate video for that. I have my merry gang of gagglefucks, Hoplophile and Delta 34, both ACOG lovers, well, mainly just Delta 34, and we're going to wade through the ACOG models on the market and our experience with them, because let's be real, most people don't have the ability to test out three $1,000 optics, or in Delta 34's case, the ability to test out 20 $1,000 optics. So it should be a good time. We'll discuss all the different options available, which ones we prefer for what scenario, yada yada yada. All right, cool. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.
Somebody give her a new stick. I'm recording.
Nova, work on your stick, dog. Not good enough, huh? Oh, that's a good one. That's a chewable stick. Excuse me. My goodness.
Beautiful.